Hello and welcome to today's module on conflict. My name is Noelle Adler and I'm the clinical lead for Somerset Counselling Centre, and I'm going to be working today with my dear friend and colleague Simon Peck, and he too is a counsellor both in private practice and with SCC, Somerset Counselling Centre. So welcome to today's subject, which is a very important one and I personally find a very tricky one. In the world of therapy, we see two lots of conflict. We define it as internal conflict and external conflict. And both of those situations we see as really, really important. So what is conflict? Well, conflict is when there is disagreement. Things are not aligned. There's a bit of a rub. There's a bit of a... That's conflict. It means that one part of you is at variance with another part of you, or something or someone else is at variance with you. So things are not harmonious and flowing and at one. So another therapeutic term we use is symbiotic. So a symbiotic relationship is a merged relationship. It's not a separate relationship. It's not that relationship. It's that relationship. And that's the relationship we have in the womb with our mother. It's a symbiotic relationship. Then, of course, we're born and we become eventually separate beings. Now, the hope is that we develop a strong enough self that we can have our own shape and we can meet other people's shape. And we can actually tolerate some of that conflict. Within ourselves, all human beings will have internal conflicts. So when I hear people say, oh no, I never feel anxious, or no, I don't ever get upset with myself, I think, really? And for me, that's a little alarm bell that they're not aware of the different parts of themselves. Similarly, when I see couples in my practice and they go, no, you know what, we've never had a crossword, I think, uh-oh. They're seeing it as we are harmonious. I'm seeing it as that they are completely symbiotic. They are merged. They haven't separated. Because if you are an individual, you will clash with other, whatever that other is. And on that topic, I am reminded of somebody I'm watching a lot on television at the moment. I'm quite obsessed with him. And his name is Gordon Ramsay. And as you know, he does these television programs where he goes into kitchens and sorts them out. And I am agog. I sit there slightly transfixed at the television, agog, not breathing, because I think I'm in a sort of semi-state of small t trauma. And I am utterly amazed at how he goes headlong into conflict. So if anybody doesn't know what conflict is, that is conflict. Now, sometimes he comes in like this dragon and he does what we call the I'm okay, you're not okay. And the person will either crumble and go, you're completely right, I'm completely rubbish at this and it's all wrong and I must be like you. Or he meets the other that goes, actually, I'm okay, you're not okay, and there's an explosion. Now, in these later television programs, what I've been really interested to note is that provocation has brought about change. Now, it's not in me to be a Gordon Ramsay. I am just not, I don't have that kind of energy. I don't really want to annihilate other people. I'm not entirely sure I'm as sure of myself as he appears to be. However, the point I'm trying to make is that we need conflict. And we need conflict because it signifies change. If we're all floaty harmony, that just means we're in the doldrums. We're in the doldrums at that point. So we need a little bit of a coconut to float past, for something different to happen, for there to be what we call a little bit of a grit in the oyster, for something to move. Traction on the wheel, Simon used that expression. We need a little bit of conflict for that to happen. And the same applies for internal conflict. We need internal conflict so that we can grow, develop, and we can hopefully become robust and resilient human beings who have some awareness of self and other. So we're going to start with the internal conflicts, and very shortly I'm going to bring Simon in. But firstly, I'm just going to name them, the 4 human conflicts, and they are independence versus dependence, activity versus passivity, adequate self-esteem versus loss of self-esteem, and unresolved or delayed grief. Now I'm going to go over to Simon, and we're not going to start quite in that order. We're going to start with the active-passive internal conflict first. So Simon, thanks for joining me. Can you just tell me a little bit about what that feels like for you, where you think your internal conflict of active and passive comes from?
Sure. I was actually going to start by remembering that when I started to think about activity versus passivity, it was external. I understand the words, so that would have been my field of reference. But because of the work that you and I do, and personal therapy and what have you, I've now have a pretty solid grasp of much of the noise, of the internal noise that's going on within me. So my therapeutic and my personal understanding of the internal conflict of activity and passivity for me has a very deep root, and the root goes all the way through to my formative years, to my parents, or my experience with my parents. And what I experienced was one parent who was very active, but the activity was very anxious, it was very unstable, and it was quite out there. And another parent whose way of dealing with that was to be very withdrawn, very absent, very passive. So there's these 2 polar opposite dynamics, to my eye anyway, to what I witnessed. One absolutely out there, and one passive and quiet. So the one that was out there seemed really angry, the one that was quiet seemed very contained. What I now have a very clear understanding about the conflict was that there was a conflict out there that wasn't being met. One was really rageful and one couldn't engage, so the conflict remained unresolved. And I saw that and took that in, and that conflict became unresolved for me. To be out there and active was dangerous. To be really passive seemed to be the right thing to do. So I've got this real internal tussle with conflict, you know.
It's anxious, isn't it?
Yeah, very anxious.
The result of that is anxious, yeah. Thank you, Simon. Can you take us on to the next remarkable internal conflict that human beings go through, which is independence versus dependence?
Well, similarly, I want to keep to the same theme because I have a very strong theoretical and personal conviction that the internal conflicts that Noelle and I are thinking about primarily, in fact, I'll get off the fence and I would say they almost inevitably come from our formative years, our parental experiences. So there was a very strong part of me to cope with conflict that found my way of identifying with the anxious parent. It was safer for me to get close to that parent, and in a way to become dependent, and to sort of like merge, and not to remain separate, to keep very close. So there was an unhealthy dependence upon that parent, which I now understand was actually not so much about my need, but it was about that parent's need to have me close to them. Whereas the other parent, I was independent from, but in an unhealthy way. I kept away from the other parent because that was an okay strategy. It worked for me. I knew what was going to happen, so I could keep away. So herein lies the conflict for me about when is there a healthy dependence and when is there a healthy independence, and what are my needs as opposed to what are the needs of the two parents that I grew with and I observed and I took stuff in from.
Yes, I mean, and on this topic, I know we were talking about the importance of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've mentioned attachment in other modules, but the importance of, if we have a secure attachment, that parent will allow us both independence and dependence. And when we get furious with them and we try to separate from them and we have tantrums and we march off and establish ourselves, they will allow us to do that and repair the relationship with them. So the ruptures in attachment, a good enough parent will help the child repair that so that they don't have a sense that being separate is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And as you and I have explored, and we theoretically also know, is that the ruptures that I witnessed, the conflict that I witnessed, were never resolved. Oh,
so that again leaves one in a very anxious, hidden place. That's the safe place, is to be hidden. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Simon, just take us through the third of the four human conflicts that we use in psychoanalysis. Adequate self-esteem versus loss of self-esteem.
So to keep along with the theme, now that I've sort of shared that one of my parents was very anxious and one was very absent, that I suppose doesn't engender one with much confidence of the outside world. So for me, the experience was not about my needs, but it was actually about my parents' needs, my parents' inability to actually resolve conflict. What I did experience was that if I were praised, for example, then I would be praised for maybe meeting one parent's needs, or if another parent, both parents almost had different roles. The other parent would praise me for doing something, but there was always a caveat. There was always, what if you do this? What if you try that next time? Now that might sound like a bit of motivation and a bit of encouragement, but for me, because it happened all the time, I could never quite get it right. So in a psychological way, that sent me a message that no matter how hard I try, it just wasn't good enough. So I wasn't good enough. So I internalise and my internal structures start to, I become a failure, a disappointment. So I hide.
That's really undermining, Simon. So, we talked earlier about I'm okay, you're okay. You were feeling I am not okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that then becomes quite a definitive internal conflict, doesn't it? Whether you can stand up for yourself, whether you can have boundaries, whether you are entitled. Those things come from the root of this human conflict, self-esteem versus lack of self-esteem.
I was going to add as well, Noah, yes. One might notice, if that dynamic sounds familiar to anybody, mm-hmm. they might notice it's coming as something about imposter syndrome.
Oh, Mr. I.
Oh, Mr. I.
Mr. I.
So that lack of confidence and that you just can't do it. Someone's going to find out, and so on. That's imposter, and that's how it manifested for me, until I started to recognise, my imposter's a Mr. Imposter. That's how he sits up here. But yeah, that's how it manifested for me.
And of course, Simon, we all have a Mr. I or a Mrs. A in my case. And once you can recognize it, of course you can have a conversation with that part of you. Once you can sense a part of you, listen to a part of you, then you can start having a different kind of relationship with that part of you. So you can now negotiate with Mr. I, can't you? And go, well, listen, thank you. Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, but you know what? We're going to do this filming. Or you know what? We're going to write this article. And we will survive the slings and arrows that come from that.
And in keeping with other modules that we've talked about,
yeah.
As I have the conversation with Mr. I, that would be, in psychological terms, that would be an example of my ego strength growing and pushing back at that hypercritical superego, that hypercritical internalized parental voice that I took in, not the superego that was just keeping me safe. It was the hypercritical superego. So now I can talk to my imposter because my ego has a place now.
Yes, it's robust enough to do that. So the fourth human conflict that psychoanalysis talks about is unresolved or delayed grief versus grief. And I had to give this one a little bit of thought because if I'm going to tell you a story. One of the ways I explain things is to tell stories. And when I was 15 years of age, I was flown out of my country of birth and where I was brought up very, very quickly. I had 3 weeks' notice. I was given 2 suitcases and £250, and I was put on an aeroplane, a jumbo jet, to London Heathrow. And I remember getting on the plane and thinking, I am alone, and I am leaving everything I know, and I should feel something, and I felt nothing. I felt completely numb. And I look back now and I go, yeah, Noelle, you were in shock and you were in trauma, small t trauma. You were in trauma. And I came to England and battled through the numbness and went to school and got A-levels and so on and so forth. And then I had a major move. In my early 30s, I had a huge move with my partner. And there it was. All the delayed grief came out and I unraveled. I got very depressed. I was in mourning and no one could understand. For goodness sake, you are moving from the south of England to the north of England with your partner. Get a grip. What is the matter with you? But for me, my internal world had just collapsed. I got very depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. I was in therapy at the time and thank goodness I was, and I had a very fine therapist. And it was very interesting that what I was experiencing was delayed grief, not only from the time of being flown to England so rapidly and leaving behind all my friends, all my community and my family, but to even previous grief. So I went into being a kind of depressed little baby, I think, who my mum went back to work 6 weeks after I was born. It was, thank you very much. Somebody else can do this now. I've got things to do. So I went back to that grief, which I wouldn't have had a context as a baby. You don't have that till you're 3 years old. So the grief was horrendous, but what I would say, I was in therapy, I was well held, I was well supported, I was safe enough to do it, and I grieved long and hard. And when I came through it, what I have to say is life was sweeter, that I have never gone back to that place, and I have never suffered the depression I did then. So grief is painful, it's difficult, it unravels us, it is enormously hard, but if we can allow it, if we can allow the sense of that loss, we can come through to a much, as Simon said, a much more ego-robust place, a stronger place, a more resilient place. So Simon and I are now going to show you a wonderful slide of a chameleon, a gladiator, and a tightrope walker. I love them. I love that chameleon, Simon. I have to say I love that chameleon. So we were thinking of examples of this. So when we're referring to a chameleon, we're referring to when we hide. when we hide in ourselves and when we hide in relationship. So we adopt the colour of where we are so that we are not seen. Simon mentioned in talking about his parents, the hidden aspect. So hide, stay merged with other. That's a chameleon position, because then you're not going to get attacked. You're not visible. You're not visible. So I also tend to be a bit of a chameleon. I'm much more of a chameleon than a gladiator. Gordon Ramsay's a gladiator. Yeah, I'm much more of a chameleon. So I was sharing with Simon that our neighbour had a new fence built, and it was a good fence, but he left it as wood and he didn't paint it white, and I was very cross about that and I didn't like it at all. And then a dear colleague of mine who I really like and respect came to the door, and I thought she was going to talk about what a wonderful front garden I had, but instead she said, "Well, I've just been standing here admiring your neighbour's fence." And I can remember this feeling of, what? Huh? You really like the fence? You're really separate to me? How could you? She said, "It's so neat. It's so I mean, look at the finish. Oh, it's wonderful." And I can remember the outraged part of me, the gladiator part of me wanted to go, how can you say that when you're standing in front of my lovely front garden and my lovely white fence and you're admiring his? And actually, I mean, it's not that important. It was a difference of opinion. She was being separate to my narcissism. She was a separate human being. And I decided to go, "Oh, it's nice you like his garden." And I didn't take up the baton. I didn't take up the fight. So a gladiatorial moment is, not Simon, Graham and I, my dear husband Graham and I, were in town for the Boxing Day sales. Not recently, this was a few years back, and we had a little blue Ascot at the time, and we were trying to park the car and it all got very nasty, and Graham drove past somebody to pick me up, not to take anybody's part, to pick me up, and this chap got out of his car, big four-wheel drive he had, enormous gel-like hair, and he came over to Graham and he tapped on the window, and please forgive my language, but I can't do it without this language, taps on the window and goes, if you get apart before me, I'll bloody you one. And we were like, walks off, and Graham went, "I'm not having this. I'm sorry, I'm just not having this." So he gets out the car, follows Mr. Gel and goes, "Come here, come closer, come here, come here. Tell me to my face. You call me what? And you're going to do what?" And actually, once he'd got out of the little Ascot, Graham is over 6 foot and very well built. So Mr. Gel, who's all gel and air, starts to retreat and climbs into his car, shuts the door, pulls up the windows and drives off. And there was a bit of me that was really scared, because I thought, I don't want physical conflict. I don't want violence over a wretched car park. This is ridiculous. Another part of me thought, actually, Graham, you faced down a bully here. So there's the active-passive struggle. There you've got it. Are you going to be passive in this? Are you going to be active in this? And the result of that is that safe, unsafe. What happened with that conflict? Well, I mean, Graham and I were both shaken because neither of us really likes conflict. I hope for the other person that there was a sense of boundary, that it's not okay to go and do that to somebody, actually. It's not okay. So then we've got the tightrope. And I suppose what I was discussing with Simon about the gladiator aspect and Graham is that I think that man triggered Graham's... Yeah, we talked about this, didn't we, Simon? Graham's earlier life, where one of his parents was really quite a bully, and I think it triggered that part of him, and he just thought, I'm not having this. I'm a grown-up now, and I'm not having this. Had he had another kind of parent, he might have gone, well, that was a bit of a pratty thing to do. I'm not going to fight him for it, but you know what? There's the boundary. I'm just going to drive off. I'm going to wind up my window and drive off. That would have been another way to deal with it. So the tightrope walker is a place of balance, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. And I think that when we're truly grounded, and we are as in touch as we in the real world can be with our emotional self, we can then see what's in front of us, we can see the conflict, we can see the difference. We can potentially hear that I'm uncomfortable with difference, and another word, I'm uncomfortable. So there could be fear, there could be the them and us, the you and me, the mine and yours, those differences. But the image of the person balancing on the tightrope is probably in the best position, because that person can choose whether there's a part of his internal, it happens to be that person's internal self wants to be a chameleon or wants to be a gladiator, but coming from a position, I suppose, of choice, from choice. Because I think that when we are truly as present as we can be, we don't necessarily have to hide, we don't necessarily have to be the Gordon Ramsay. We can choose. We can choose whether to meet that conflict, or whether actually there is conflict, but actually I don't need to meet that because I'm okay. I don't need to meet that, I'm okay. So it almost brings into focus that the other thing that we were talking about, Noelle, was the three sort of like other ways of describing this. The chameleon may be, I'm not okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
The gladiator may be, I'm okay and you're not okay. And the tightrope person may be, I'm okay, you're okay too. And I can sit with the difference, even if I don't agree with it, I'm okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a little slide here, the trickle-down, what we call the trickle-down effect of conflict. And it's part of the toolkit of noticing. So noticing when something is frightening and tense. This may be within yourself, or it may be with other, or both. At that point of tension, anxiety, fear, please stop. And you know what I'm going to say next. Breathe. Breathe in and breathe out longer. Breathe in, breathe out longer. At this point, you can start to think. The chairman's come on board and you can start to unpick what the situation is. So that's the tightrope walker that we talked about. At that point, there's a kind of sense of I can get my balance, I have an option, what do I need to do here, what am I feeling, what's the point? You can work it through, you can process it in a different way. There's option. Questioning. So what is wrong? Is it a communication to myself when I'm feeling this anxious and I've got an internal conflict? How come I've got that internal conflict? What's it communicating? What position am I taking? You know, as Simon said, is it the I'm okay, you're okay position, or I'm not okay, you're okay, or you're not okay, but I'm okay? Think of the position you're taking. Are you being a chameleon, a gladiator, or a tightrope walker? Is this what I want? What is the point of this conflict? So we also have a takeaway. So part of the takeaway is remember the toolkit of the trickle-down effect. The stop, breathe, think. Remember that. Remember, your feelings are a communication from your internal world to you. Take time to recognize your internal conflicts. It is human to have these conflicts. Once you've identified your internal conflict, you may find that you will not only know yourself better, but give yourself more choices in life concerning reactions. Conflict is important and necessary. Conflict equals possibility of change, awareness of difference. It is the grit to your oyster. It is about individualism. Well, suffice to say, Simon, thank you so much for joining me today in this topic, this very interesting and helpful topic. Thank you. Thank you to those who are watching. I hope you get some helpful pointers through this module. Take care, go well, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.